Okay, so this one's curious. We had the announcement at State of Play of a Microsoft game, a high-profile game, in fact. Flight Simulator 2024 is coming to PlayStation 5 and the Professional. This trailer was actually shown running on the PlayStation 5 Professional. What's also interesting here is that we had confirmation that maybe not at launch, but sometime down the road, we're going to be getting a PSVR 2 version of the game, which I think is really cool. It's kind of like one of these things that the developer, Microsoft, didn't need to do. Presumably there's some sort of developmental cost involved with that, but they're doing it nonetheless. It's Flight Simulator. It looks absolutely fantastic. We never really had time to look at Flight Simulator 2024 when it came out. It's one of these weird situations where review code wasn't seeded. I think there was a beta, though. Alex, what do you take away from this particular showing?
Well, yeah, also as another thing, the game launched with like big online internet issues, so we couldn't really cover it too well, which was a big problem.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, looking at this trailer here, I'm actually grateful that it was presented in a nice clean 4K presentation, because you can already start appreciating stuff like the resolution setup from the trailer. This game on console used a version of TAAU, temporal anti-aliasing upsampling, kind of like you might find in like an Unreal Engine 4 title. And back when it launched on Xbox, it was a game that was widely reported everywhere. It was running at 4K, and everybody was like, how is this running at 4K? It destroys PCs. I did distinctly remember that. And it's like, well, just turn the camera and you can see the internal resolution. And it was like slightly higher than 1440p. It's like, I think this trailer, you can find a lot of straight lines that count to around 1512p. And that would be very consistent with what I believe we counted for the Xbox Series X version.
Yeah, I think for 2020, Flight Sim 2020, I'm pretty sure it was 1512p.
Yeah. And here, it's just, what can I say? It's the upgraded version of 2020 with a lot finer grain detail on all of the natural environmental areas. The cities looked pretty great, I would say, in 2020, and everything at a certain plane's height looked amazing, but as soon as you get lower to the ground on any of the planes or helicopters, etc., that allowed you to go lower, you'd start seeing the obvious seams in the world because it was being streamed in from map data that was incomplete and didn't have the right procedural generation to cover certain landscapes. And here it's way better in 2024 if you've ever played it in person. The one thing I'm curious about, though, considering we're looking at PS5 Pro footage, is they did add specifically for the cockpit ray trace shadows. And I would be curious if they would bring those into the PS5 Pro version, or if they would spend resources on things like better cloud coverage. That's one of the things that the PC version offers, and that the Xbox version, for example, back in the day had lower quality of, was things like clouds were slightly lower quality. The upper tier quality cloud setting in the game is ridiculous looking. It's also very ridiculously expensive. So I'd be curious to see if they would rather spend the resources on like higher quality settings for the world, for the cockpit. There's like a balance there. And I hope it isn't just like the Series X version just running on PS5 Pro with like slight differences in performance maybe. Because that Series X version was a 30 FPS clip, but there was also an unlocked mode that was very curious. So I'd just be curious to see like exactly what they choose to, how they choose to adapt the graphical systems for PS5 Pro.
Just had sudden PTSD flashbacks to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where on the PC version, if you ran the clouds at max settings,
yes,
it basically tanks frame rate by 30%. You put it down to high and it looks pretty much the same, and it like just runs a ton better.
Yeah,
just kind of made me chuckle. Oliver, Flight Simulator or PS5 Professional, what do you think?
Yeah, beyond the technical minutiae, because this is a game I have not covered in any detail, unlike Alex. I've taken a look at the game casually, had some fun with it. It's certainly very beautiful, especially like Alex mentioned, in those cities when you're flying through New York or Sydney or Vancouver or Toronto and seeing all this cool stuff, or Paris. I mean, they just look incredible, I would say. The scans they have just look incredible. But overall, I think this looks quite good. This is another one of Microsoft's live service type games, so I think it makes sense that they would want to reach a large audience. But I'd still imagine with a game like this that in many cases is best with specialized hardware, cockpits, whatever, flight sticks, that the largest audience would be on PC. I think this is one of those games that I think probably shines on a dedicated PC, multi-monitor setup, whatever you have going on. That's probably the best setup for this game. But I presume they've done the math and determined this is a good idea regardless. But yeah, this is part of the whole slate essentially coming to PlayStation 5 in one form or another. There are not many games left. I mean, I did a quick tally here, and there's like Halo Infinite, Forza Motorsport, Starfield, couple smaller ones like Gears Tactics and South of Midnight as well. There are a couple games in there that have been released on Xbox that have not yet been announced for PlayStation 5. And then of course, there are some games that are coming out in the future that have not yet been announced for PlayStation 5, but we probably presume will be coming in some form. So I think this is just like another, more evidence that Microsoft is trying to shift their strategy over to a multi-platform strategy. And I hope it works out well for them with this game. It's not like one of the games that I think people had on their lists as being like, this is for sure primed for PlayStation. But if there is a large flight sim community on PlayStation that I'm not aware of, I hope this can be a big success for Microsoft. And I hope they can reach a new player base on PlayStation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got this supporter question from Todd Weitzel. I'm fascinated by the business arrangement of getting PSVR 2 support into Flight Sim 2024. Do you think Sony is subsidizing it as a last-ditch attempt to move PSVR 2 units, or is Microsoft funding it on their own prerogative? I don't think Sony is going to be investing any sizable amounts of cash into PSVR 2 at this point. No. I think it's probably just an adaptation of the work that they've done for the PC version. Kind of makes sense. I don't think, if Sony suddenly came out saying, hey, by PSVR 2, you can play Flight Simulator in VR, it's probably not going to shift the needle for PlayStation, for PSVR 2 units. So I think it's just a cool thing that Asobo wants to do. Yeah. I don't know what you think, Alex.
Well, I think it's interesting because, I do think, like you, it is just an adaptation of the PC stuff, and they support a lot of peripherals on PC. So I don't see why they wouldn't also support the few peripherals that PlayStation offers, and that's one of them. But performance is a question I have, because this game is very CPU heavy, especially when you fly over cities, and you in a VR setting, you don't want to go below 60. If they're just I'm curious to see if it will actually be 60 FPS internally, or if they just rely wholly on asynchronous time warp. Because as soon as you get into any of those cities in this game, the Zen 2 processor is like slightly above 30 FPS there, not too much higher than 30 FPS.
Yeah. Obviously, you're quite right. Those cities are actually really, really demanding on CPU, and it's especially if you're unlocked, then the consistency just goes out the window.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to see what it, just like my question earlier, what do they actually bring to the table there? And if it is actually a good experience, because I think, having used VR, I don't think asynchronous time warp is good if you're just, or whatever the equivalent name of it is on the Sony side, is anything really good if you're using it the entire time to hit your refresh rate. I think it's something you have to use for those rarer moments, but if you're just using it for large stretches of times, like the double image effect, as well as the kind of, I don't know what it's like, but when you see the world moving at a different rate than your head, it just starts feeling really trippy. It doesn't feel very good. Yeah. So it's a nice thing to cover the patches where it doesn't work out, but it can't be for a large portion of the experience.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Oliver?
No. I think with all the PSVR stuff here, it is definitely an Asobo thing. They already have a VR implementation on PC. I imagine they're just bringing that work over to PlayStation. I couldn't imagine in an era where Sony has basically stopped first-party software support for PlayStation VR 2 that they would be very invested in that as a games maker. I think they've basically given up on the platform. I mean, not given up. There's still obviously games coming out, But like one example of that is just in this showcase. You know, Sony typically in their showcases gives at least some amount of coverage for PlayStation VR titles. And outside of this, I don't think there was any PSVR title, any dedicated PSVR title out for PlayStation 5 consoles, or indeed a title with an alternative mode for PSVR 2 systems. So yeah, I would not expect that. I mean, whatever the merits of this PSVR implementation, as Alex pointed out, hopefully the performance will be better, at least than we see on PC. Perhaps it won't be. But whatever the merits of it, I don't think there's any explicit support from Sony going into this effort.